Hi, and welcome to Biocides in Leather, A Blessing or Curse, a webinar sponsored by LANXESS and brought to you by ILM in association with raw materials pricing website, The Sow Report. I'm Tom Hogarth, Deputy Editor of International Leather Maker, the leading leather industry business information brand. Today, Andreas Weckmann and Franziska Sophia Romhild of LANXESS will explain why we need biocides, their benefits, the options already available on the market, regulatory difficulties and the future of biocides, and also the facts around sustainability and safety. They will also provide an update on the restricted substances lists. Before we begin, I would like to tell you a bit about International Leather Maker and the Sow Report. ILM serves the global leather supply chain through 6 printed magazines a year, a website with the latest industry news and opinion articles, twice weekly e-newsletters, podcasts, webinars, and more. Meanwhile, the Sow Report is the world's leading hides and skins pricing platform, offering users the latest raw materials prices and leather industry trends on a daily basis. For more content like today's webinar, please keep an eye on the ILM website for announcements about upcoming webinars and other events, both digital and in person. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our presenters. Andreas Weckmann is Head of Technical Marketing Leather Biocides at LANXESS. After joining the company in 2011 to manage biocides and enzymes for the leather industry, Andreas took on his current position in 2021 and is now responsible for new product development, technical customer service, and supporting the strategy of the LANXESS leather biocide business. Franziska Sophia Romhild is Global Product Manager for biocides for the leather industry at LANXESS. In her role, she defines the strategy for the leather protection business, manages and optimizes the product portfolio, and coordinates an interdisciplinary team that is maneuvering the path to the future of leather. The presentation will be followed by a live Q&A session led by ILM Content Director Martin Ricker. If you have any questions for today's presenters, please submit them via the question box on your screen and make sure to include who your question is aimed at. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. I'll now hand over to our presenters.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Franziska Röhmhild and I'm a Global Product Manager for biocides in the leather industry at LANXESS. And before we dive deep into the topic of today of biocides in the leather process, I will give a quick introduction of LANXESS. There are a lot of products, a lot of different brands, and a lot of different opinions of LANXESS. So I will start with a quick wrap up. So often it happens to us that customers still refer to Bayer, and that's because LANXESS was carved out of Bayer in 2004. And this was in order to separate the agrochemicals and the healthcare chemicals on the one side and the specialty chemicals on the other side. So LANXESS today is focused on the specialty chemicals, for example, intermediates and additives. And we are headquartered in Cologne in Germany. You can see the photo of our LANXESS tower on the left-hand side. And yeah, Cologne is not far away from Leverkusen, which is the original Bayer plant and where Bayer is still located today. We are almost 15,000 employees on a global level, and with more than 6 billion sales in 2020. There are a lot of different business units at LANXESS. In total, it's 11 business units. Andreas and me, we are at the Material Protection Products, short MPP, business unit that, as the name already implies, focuses on really securing the quality of products. We are one of the top 5 biocides companies in the world, with around 800 employees and around €500 million euro sales, and we really focus on all different kinds of applications. So very common is in-can preservation of liquid products such as paints and coatings, or you would also have the detergents in the home care sector. We are also focused on industrial applications such as construction or water treatment, water disinfection. up to the preservation of foods and beverages. And of course, and that's why we're here today, we also active in the preservation of leather. Looking at this map, you can see our footprint just of the business unit MPP. And you can see we are really active on a global level. Headquarter, as mentioned before, in red, is in Cologne in Germany. But we have production sites in all regions, really from several production sites in Europe, several in Asia. We have some in the US, in Brazil as well. And the same is true for our laboratories. So really present in all the regions. And of course, we also supply regulatory support on a global level with experts in our headquarters, and then also locally employees focusing on the regional level. And there is one question that we hear all the time, and that is LANXESS still active in the leather industry? And I already answered that question a moment ago, because yes, we are. But to give a short background, so LANXESS sold its organic leather chemicals to TFL last year in 2021. There is where the confusion comes from. But the biocide business is still with LANXESS, and this is really something where we provide a lot of expertise within, just because of our background and our portfolio. And looking at LANXESS, really for the leather protection market, we do not have to hide. We offer really a complete service and portfolio. Just looking at our products, we provide products, biocides, fungicides, bactericides for all relevant applications, starting from the rawhide preservation, so bactericides, which we mostly sell on the Brazilian market. We also have bactericides for soaking. Our focus area definitely lies within the tanning. Here we have a broad portfolio of fungicides. And then indirectly, we also sell in-can preservation for the leather industry. So this would, for example, be for the finishing products. We have locally technical service available in all the regions. We have labs that can do microbial testing. And of course, we also can come to tanneries on site and provide support there. As mentioned before, we are very strong in the regulatory support. So here we have access to a lot of efficacy data and performance tests that we can share in order, if needed, for registrations and things like this. But we also offer support regarding restricted substance lists, which is very, very common in the leather industry. And as you've also seen on the map, we have production sites all around the globe, which of course allows us to also produce the products where they are needed, and thus have shorter lead time whenever needed. Yeah, and that would be the overview of LANXESS, and especially of the leather biocides that we have at LANXESS. And I will hand over to my colleague Andreas to really guide you through today's topic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Franziska. I will talk now about biocides in the leather making process. Is it a blessing or is it a curse? For this, I will start to tell you why and where we do need the biocides in the process. And the question is, are there residues in the final leather of the biocides? Can we maybe avoid biocides in the leather making process? And if not, what about the residues in the final leather? Is it harmful? How dangerous is this for consumers? And Everything starts in a slaughterhouse. In the slaughterhouse, there's the rawhide, and once the rawhide is peeled off from the animal, the time runs. It means you have bacteria, you have dirt, you have very dirty hides, and the bacteria is starting to degrade the hide immediately. If you do not do anything, if you do not preserve here, it is that you get hair looseness and after just 12 or 24 hours, and in the end the leather quality will be very bad. Usually in most of the countries you are salting, you use salt for the preservation. Salt means a dehydration of the hide, and dehydration means that bacteria or microorganisms cannot proliferate or grow anymore. But there are some countries where the raw hides are directly transported to the tanneries, and there and no salting, so it's a fresh hide, and this is something there you need biocides, and there are biocides applied for this application, that the raw hides are not degraded from the slaughterhouse to the tannery. For sure, the next step is the protection during processing, and here especially we are talking about the soaking process in the beginning. Here it is. You have again the dirt, blood, fat, collagen, so protein, and all the bacteria which are on the hide. And this is something you put into water in a drum, and then the drum is running. This means you're also putting oxygen inside, and this is perfect environment. Actually, here we in our microbiology labs we do the same to proliferate bacteria in the lab scale. And this is something, if you do not add here any biocide, and these are bactericides, you will the hair will get loose again, and the quality will be very bad of the leather. So here bactericides are needed. Then for sure the main part is the leather intermediate protection. So once you have a wet blue, wet white, whatever, chrome free tanning, usually the intermediates are stored and transported all over the world. Here the situation is a little different, and the pH is around 4 after tanning, or maybe a little bit higher for other tanning processes. And this is perfect for, and you still have some the wet intermediates have about around 50% water content. You have still collagen, you still have maybe some fat inside, and the pH is around 4, and this is perfect not for bacteria. This is a perfect environment for fungus or for mold to grow. And also here, if you do not put biocide inside, you lose quality of the leather, and dyeability will be less good in the end. And here the biggest part of biocides are put into the leather making process. Then as a next step, also in some regions it is common to use some biocide in the crust. So in the retanning process, this is mainly to protect the leather or the crust until it's dry. So it's not to protect the dry crust in the end, but because usually if the leather or the crust is dry, there's no more water content, or only less water content, and which is not available for microorganisms to grow. So also in some countries, especially countries which have where the climate is very hot and humid, they also put some biocides in the crusting. Then to make it complete, also in the finishing products, or let's say products which are put on the leather or in the leather, some of them are preserved. Franziska already mentioned it. This is called in-can preservation. This is for finishing products, maybe for oily waxes or fat liquors, and they need to be stabilized also during transport. And then they are applied to the leather and still contain, let's say, some biocides. So now the question, after we have heard that there are some steps where biocides are used, is it unavoidable or is it are there unavoidable residues in the finished leather? So let's have a closer look. Is it possible to avoid biocides? So coming back to the rawhide. Yeah, salt is the main rawhide preservation. So that means in general, let's say if we have a global view, yes, most of it is salted or brine cured or whatever, and only in some countries are the bactericides are needed. So in general, here biocides can be avoided if salt is a problem in the country or whatever, and you working with fresh hides, then bactericides are needed. To transport them in a refrigerated container is often not feasible. Could be an option, but actually it's maybe only done in a few countries. During process, especially during the soaking, it's really a dirty solution which you have. It's from 1 to 100 million bacteria per milliliter, and so here are strong bactericides needed at the moment. And so far, we do not see any alternatives to change this. I know there are some ideas to have some ozone treatment in this, but let's say if we are talking about the general industry, here it's not possible to avoid using biocides if you want to have a good quality leather. When we are talking about short soaking without any bactericides, can be done, but from my point of view, also for short soaking, you should add some biocides. The biocides which are used in these process steps, there are usually no residues expected in the final leather, because the bactericides are active and they are used up and they are degraded. Then is it possible to avoid biocides in the leather intermediates? For sure, you can minimize or even avoid biocides when you are working right through to crust. This means you have a wet blue plant and a retanning plant, and you directly use a wet blue which you are producing to crust. But this is actually when we see the global market, it's not the case, and fungicide are needed for the global market with long-term storage and the transportation. So also here we do not see any alternative at the moment to biocides which are used, or fungicides for this application. The application in the crusting, as I said before, it's only done in some countries where the climate is very humid and hot, and here we see that it's also there are no other alternatives at the moment instead of using biocides. But let's say in general, this is a smaller aspect, the biocides in the crusting. The ink preservation, there are more and more labeling restrictions for the ink preservation. There are still the traditional biocides used to protect the chemicals itself. There are some green boosters in development, but let's say these biocides are made to protect the products. It's not that the biocides are added to protect the finished leather in the end. So also the actives are very low dosed, and this has less impact on leather chemicals. But from these three application steps, so the leather intermediate, the crusting, and the incan, there could be some residues in the final leather. So in general, we can say we cannot avoid to have residues of biocides in the leather. And yeah, here I have written, now the curse begins, because first of all, I want to explain which biocides are used in these applications. And the main biocides which are used in the leather industry are still the big four, let's say. And for sure, there are some other active ingredients, but in 90% of the cases, these biocides are used. And we are talking about OPP, it's orthophenylphenol, talking about PCMC, then an isothiazolinone, the OIT, and the TCMTB. These are the big four. which are still used and which are also very known in the leather industry. And what do I mean with the curse begins? Because as everyone knows that there is something that there can be residues of these active ingredients, and I'm only focusing on these four now. There is a lot of misunderstanding, wrong information maybe, and we are talking about the brands in the end, which have their restricted substance list. Yeah? It's a good idea to have the restricted substance list in order to protect the consumers. Yeah? But if you have a look here a little bit on the screen now, there are so different numbers and different lists, and just imagine you are a tanner, you are a wet blue producer somewhere, yeah? and you want to preserve your wet blue and want to send it around the world, and you need to put something in, and then you can imagine the wet blue will be the leather will end up maybe at different brands in the end, yeah. And then you have 5 ppm from this, the other one say 100, then the 500, yeah. And in the end, you need to fulfill, or you need to have the limits of all the lowest limits, because you never know where to go. And this is something which we really which is really complicated for tanneries, and makes it really difficult to protect the wet blues or the leather intermediates. Just an example, how different, and then the question is, where are these limits coming from? Why do we put 100 for TCM, TB, OIT, OPP, and CMK in total, something like this? And this is done in the different industries. There is some inconsistent values, and I just want to show you now an example for OPP. OPP is used not only in leather preservation. So here in the middle you see some shoes, and I put there 5 to 1,000 milligram per kilogram, which is not a legal limit or whatever. This is just let's say the range we see on the restricted substance lists. On the other hand, OPP is also used in other applications, and the European biocidal product regulation is setting some upper limits for different applications. Here you can see that you have the hand disinfection, for example, and actually this is there. It's allowed in Europe to sell products up to 20,000 milligram per kilogram, 20,000 milligram per kilogram for hand disinfecting in hospitals. So professional use. This means a doctor can disinfect his hands with a solution up to 20,000 milligram per kilogram. Then it's cosmetic. Cosmetic, to be honest, is not part of the biocidal product regulation. It's a separate regulation, but also there for skin-on cosmetics, it's allowed to have 2,000 ppm. And then also another application is the veterinary hygiene. You can spray solutions with 2,500 milligram per kilogram, and also disinfection of private areas is allowed. So the question is, how is the biocidal product regulation doing this? How can they say 20,000 milligram per kilogram in a hand disinfectant is okay, and 2,000 for cosmetics? And this is the good thing. They are doing a risk assessment. The risk assessment was done for the hand disinfectant, veterinary hygiene, public and private area disinfecting for OPP already. For leather, which is the product type 9, it's still ongoing. And they are doing a risk assessment. And what is a risk assessment? A risk assessment, and the question is, what is the risk for a chemical, for consumers, for workers, whatever? And risk is a combination of hazard and exposure. So this means, for example, if you have a very hazardous chemical, like for example the Botox, this Botox is a chemical, which you can put into your skin that you look younger. It's produced by Clostridium botulinum. It's a bacteria, and it's the most poisoned substance in the world, I guess. With a small spoon, you could kill, let's say, maybe London. Yeah, but if you just put only a few molecules under your skin, so the exposure is very low. Yeah, the risk is acceptable, and a lot of people and more people are doing this. On the other hand, for example, the hazard of water, yeah, of just drinking water, is very low. So I can also drink it and swim in it. So the risk, the exposure is very high, and but the overall risk is low. The problem now for chemicals and also for biocides is that the risk is medium and the exposure needs to be found out. So this means in a risk assessment, let's stay with the example of for leather. With the risk assessment for a biocide, there are some scenarios. Yeah, it starts with, let's say, in our plants where we produce the product. Yeah, the worker, what is the exposure, what they get, and then there's a risk assessment. Is it acceptable or is it not acceptable? And the end it's approved or not approved for this application. Then the next thing is the worker in a tannery, who is handling the chemicals, the biocides. Yeah. So what is inhalation? What is skin contact and so on? And this is also evaluated. And in the end, is it acceptable or not? And then also in the last step, it's something the consumers itself. And also in this risk assessment, it's calculated if someone is wearing a shoe, a leather shoe, maybe without socks, for 8 hours a day, or is it acceptable for a taxi driver to sit in a car with leather seats 8 hours in the sun? And this is what is the exposure, and is it acceptable or not? And all this is done. All this and also other scenarios was done for the example with the hand disinfectant, but all this is done for the leather. And so in the end, you have let's say a very good idea: is it acceptable or is it not acceptable to have still some residues in the final leather, furniture, automotive, or shoe? And then we say, hey, that's good. It's a blessing that we have this risk assessment, because this is something scientifically based, and in the end you have some values you can work with, and the application is safe for the worker in let's say in our production, for the worker in a tannery, and also for the consumer in the end. So this is the blessing we have, that they are risk assessed. Okay. But now the question, what should we do with this, with the knowledge that we know some limits where it's getting dangerous or not for worker or for consumers? And then the question is, okay, for the restricted substance list, should we put it into a, let's say, white list? What means white list? Yeah, let's take all the biocides which are already risk assessed and where we know the risk. And put them on the list and say, please use these chemicals, not other chemicals. Use these because they are risk assessed, and then maybe also limit up to 4,000 or 20,000 milligram per kilogram. Yeah, just an example. And then let's say it's safe for the consumer. On the other hand, it's the idea could also be a so-called blacklist. It means you put on the chemicals and say, hey, you are not allowed to use this, only up to this special limit. Okay, there are pros and cons for both of the types. I personally prefer the white list. For sure, if you have a white list, yeah, and if you already approved actives, to get new actives approved on this list, yeah, could be some problems, but anyway, new actives need to be registered, for example, in Europe. A blacklist, from my point of view, this is something that you have an unknown risk that people, or not people, tanneries, because of maybe these different restricted substances, are forced to find maybe some other solutions, maybe something which they are not looking for, which we cannot test, or which are not on the list. And this is a higher risk for the consumer in the end, and also for the workers in the tannery industry. So the white list concept increases the consumer safety, and this is what we would what we support. On the last slide, I just wanted to give some, let's say, idea of the future of biocides. There are a lot of hurdles coming for the biocides. There are stricter legal requirements, more and more for isotonizones, maybe for sensitizers, and it's going on and on and on. And here we need to be careful that we not limit all biocides which can be used in the leather industry, because development of completely new biocides, so new chemicals which can be used, it's very, very difficult. And also their hurdle is the cost and the time. Yeah, and so to develop and to have a new chemical and to get all the registration, all the scientific data, it takes it's millions of euro costs, and it takes years to have a new active. So maybe in future it is something like not, let's say, brand new chemicals which we have, biocides. So we should take care of the existing ones, yeah. Do not limit them or ban them. But maybe in the future we have something like, it's called boosters, which can be used, that increase the actives which are used at the moment. The advantage is no biocide registration is needed and less registration costs for other things. But still, it will be difficult and also expensive to have this. To summarize this presentation is, okay, is it a blessing or a curse, the biocide in the leather industry? From our point of view, first of all, it's a blessing to have biocides. Just imagine we would not have any biocide, then let's say the leather making process, the worldwide trading would not be possible at the moment. So it's a blessing that we have them, and it's also a blessing that they are risk assessed. That, let's say, all biocide producers need to register and to show every data they have to get approval. And this is also something very, very, which is a blessing and good. And what we see that modern RSLs or MRSL, so the manufacturing restricted substance, they are already taking this into account, and this is something which we see and we like, that they see that biocides are maybe a little different compared to other chemicals, and that the biocides, it's not only that we need to have a risk assessment and not only look on the hazard of a chemical. So that's all from my side, and now I hope you have a lot of questions, comments, or whatever, and thanks a lot.
Good day to everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for the webinar today. Now we're going on to the live Q&A. I'm Martin Ricker, the Content Director of International Leather Maker. I just wanted to mention before our presenters join us that you can post a question to any presenters using the control panel on your screen. Any questions that we haven't covered today will be forwarded to our presenters so they can respond to you directly. and please make sure you specify the name of the presenter your question is addressed to. So if Andreas and Franziska would like to join me. Okay. Good afternoon. Good day.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi. First of all, I've got a question for you, Franziska, if you could answer this one. You mentioned in the presentation, since many of the supply chains have been disrupted due to COVID-19, the pandemic, are you able to manufacture and distribute your product ranges to all the global markets at the moment? Or is there any sort of supply chain issues that are affecting the market?
Yeah, we are in the lucky position that most of the active ingredients that we use for the leather fungicides are produced at our own production site. So in this case, we do not see such a big disruption. Of course, we see some disruption, especially coming from logistics. When we talk about chemical ingredients coming from from Asia, and either way, we are happy to have a stable supply. We needed to adapt our logistic pattern, so to order with more advanced time to have higher safety stocks. But in this way, we managed to have a stable supply of all our products. Of course, what we see, and I guess all the chemical companies will be able to sing a song about it, is the high cost that we are facing at the moment, which partly is of course driven by the logistic increase. So the logistic cost, especially ocean freight, is just at a huge peak right now. This is of course one of the main cost drivers we are facing at the moment, but also looking at energy costs, and especially for our European production, this is challenging at the moment.
Yeah, it is difficult. Andreas, if I could come over to you, I've got a question here from Raphael, who's one of the attendees. What is the impact of LANXESS biocide over bacterial activity in the tannery wastewater treatment plant?
Yeah, so usually when we are talking about the fungicides, where we protect the intermediates, wet blue, wet white, whatever, first of all, most of the actives end up in the leather. Let's say in the residues which might end up in the wastewater treatment plant are readily biodegradable, or most of them, and are usually no problem for bacteria in the activated sludge. For sure, let's say the wastewater treatment must get used to it, but in the end, it's we do not see any problems with this.
Okay, and Raphael also asks, is there any measurement to check the biocide level on lime splits or trimmings that are not used by tanneries that go into gelatin or the collagen industries?
Okay, but then we are talking about bactericides which are used in the soaking in the beginning, and these are quick acting, let's say, actives, which are degraded when they are active, and usually they do not end up in the, let's say, in the waste for the gelatin production. Let's say there's no quick measurement which you could do at a tannery. For sure, you could check for some actives in the lab, but there's no, let's say, on-site method at the moment.
Okay. If I could come back to you, Franziska, if I was a brand or a retailer or an OEM and I was concerned about safe biocide content in finished leather products, can your company offer any advice or guidance on setting sensible limits for finished leather products?
Yeah, so the best guidance is actually given by the authorities. So when looking at, for example, the BPR regulation in Europe, this is a good guidance, because whenever we register an active ingredient, it is really safety assessed for all kind of application and all kind of situations. So the result we get from this sort of risk assessment that is done during a registration process gives us the best values to really know what is the safe limit. within an application. And we have a regulatory team in our headquarters that is really in very close contact with authorities that provides all these data for these safety or for these risk assessments. So we have our regulatory team, our global regulatory team, and also local regulatory experts that can definitely help to define these or to help with the safe values that can be used. And of course, there are all the brands that have their own restricted substance list. So wherever you want to sell to, you have to take this into account as well. But really to be on the safe side and to know what is scientifically the right dosage and limit, it's best to use the calculated values in doing the risk assessments with authority.
Okay, and can you just tell me what does BPR stand for?
Yeah, the BPR is the biocide regulation in the European Union. It's one of the most important biocidal regulations that we have in the world. Of course, there's also the EPA, which is active on the US market, and those two authorities are let's call them like the leading authorities for the biocide world.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that leads me on nicely to the next question for you, Andreas. This is from Adrian. I understand that risk assessment is ongoing for leather under BPR. What is the expected timeline?
Yeah, a very good question. Actually, we were expecting to have it already done, but it's prolonged many times. And let's say how it works. First, you have to get an approval for the active ingredient. Yeah. So this is ongoing. This was already done for PCMC, yeah, which was the first one which was approved, I think 5 years or 4 years ago already. And then the next step is to get a registration for the biocidal product itself. For example, if a product contains PCMC, OPP, and OIT, yeah, first all of the 3 actives need to be approved, and then you get you need a registration for the product itself. So I cannot say an exact timeline. I need to ask our regulatory colleagues, but it's not expected, let's say, tomorrow.
Okay. And Adrian also asks, considering that common biocides such as TCM-TB are skin sensitizers, and that the quantitative risk assessment is limited for this endpoint of sensitization to ensure safe use, what is the chance that they will be approved, and what are the other possibilities for tanners to use?
Yeah, again, a difficult question. So it's not that all of them are skin sensitizers, yeah, and also that's the reason why we have this risk assessment. Yeah, so even if the hazard is quite high, as I already told in the presentation, yeah, it still could be not an let's say an effect for human skin or for the consumers or workers in the tannery, and that's the reason why we do this risk assessment, or why we support and think that is the best way, just instead looking on the hazard itself of a chemical.
Okay, I've got a question here from Yari for you again, Andreas. How is the biodegradability of leather influenced by biocides, and do the biocides break down into uncritical parts as well after time?
So it's about biodegradability of leather in the end.
Yeah, how is the biodegradability of leather influenced by biocides?
Yeah, for sure, biocides, they are made to let's say to stop or to work against the biodegradability, yeah, because bacteria and other organisms are doing this. But as I said, in a special, if the concentration in the leather is below a special limit, yeah, then also the biocides can be biodegradable and yeah, do not have any effect more on the biodegradability.
Okay, I'll throw this one to you, Francisca, but if Andreas, you want to add, what is the best step to put biocide into tanning to ensure a regular concentration of biocide in wet blue for the best protection?
Yeah, I think I will cover this question.
Okay.
The best point to add is for in our experience for our products, it's after the chrome addition. So maybe half an hour or an hour after the chrome addition, yeah, and then let it run overnight or the 8 hours, whatever how the process is, and then you get the best uptake and the best protection in the end.
Okay. I'm gonna finish. This is going to be the last question. This is from Sebastian, and I'll maybe to you, Andreas. As you know, there is a proposal to classify OPP as a CMR and currently under process by the ECHA. Do you think that CMR classification could threaten the future of this biocide?
First of all, there's a proposal. This does not mean that it will become true in the future. Yeah, we know this, and we are also talking about this. Yeah, and this is also one reason why we are looking at, let's say, not only the classification, the hazard classification of chemicals. Yeah, and this is very, very important, especially for the biocides, because the biocides are made to, let's say, kill something. Yeah. They should not kill people who are wearing shoes. Yeah, that's for sure. But this is something we are talking about, and and this is again the reason why we think a risk assessment is a better thing. And yeah, so we know that there's a proposal, but it's still not valid, and also not sure that it will be something like this in future.
Okay. Okay. Thanks very much. I think that's a good point to end the Q&A today. I just want to thank you both for taking the time. And if you could turn off your cameras and mute you, then I'll wrap up. And if we're getting any further questions, I'll forward them on to you both.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so that concludes our webinar for today. And a big thank you to our two presenters for sharing their expertise. I would like to thank LANXESS for their sponsorship of this webinar. We'll be posting the full webinar online shortly in case you would like to listen to it again. A link to the recording will be sent out to everyone who registered for today's presentation. I think that will probably be sent to you tomorrow. Finally, you will now be asked a short survey about today's webinar, which will give us some valuable feedback to ensure that we're offering content that continues to be of interest to you. And as I mentioned at the beginning, ILM and the SAR report will be hosting more free to attend webinars as well as podcasts over the coming weeks and months. So please keep an eye out for future topics on the ILM website. Our website details could be seen on the screen in front of you now. And I just want to say thank you for listening and for registering and taking the time to watch our webinar today. Thank you very much and goodbye.